Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm George Hidalgo, Club President, and thank you for joining us. My message today is strategic planning. Now, our club is not just only one of the largest in the world, but also one of the oldest in the world. Now, we have a long and rich history of making a difference in our community. But that track record of success also comes with responsibility. It's the responsibility to make our legacy known and to have it embraced by others who will carry the torch through the end of this young century and beyond. That's why we must not only survive this extraordinary period of hardship, but also grow and thrive. It is in that spirit that we have established 3 task forces to look at member recruitment, member retention and engagement, and our club governance. There will be 7 to 10 members serving on each task force with a report presented to our board in the spring. And this is where you come in. Your thoughts on member recruitment, member retention engagement, and club governance are not only welcome, but absolutely appreciated. Please contact me or the Rotary office to share input on these important issues. Don't put it off. Please do it this week. Please do it today. By sharing your insights, you will be actively contributing to our club's legacy as we connect, grow, and serve together. So let's direct our attention to our opening music. Ellis Waller will play Your Grand Old Flag on the bagpipes for us today. Ellis? So we are already in week 4 of our community grants campaign. Ellsworth Brown will give us an update report.
Good afternoon. Your reporter at large is here to give you once more a weekly update on the community grants campaign's progress, and it's really fantastic. 141 of you have given so far $65,692.73. I'm assuming that the 73 cents is part of a larger gift. And that's really good news. The even better news is that 42% of you have increased your giving over last year in response to the needs of this difficult time in America, in Dane County, in Madison, and in many cases for our own families. Thank you so much for that. But of course, that means that if 141 of you have given, 288 of you have not yet contributed. So this afternoon, call the office, give them your credit card, tell them you have an open account, and they can put in any number they want or write a check. Whatever you do, see if you can get a gift in the coming week so that we can report even better numbers, higher numbers on behalf of the needs of our community next week. I want to thank you all for your giving and show you one more video that demonstrates what it goes for. We gave $3,900 to the Simpson Street Free Press. I'm sure that if you've walked the downtown streets anytime in the past, you have been approached by somebody who wants to give you or sell you a copy of the Simpson Street Free Press, which serves children 2nd grade through 12th grade. It's a program that we know from the street presence, but it's also a program that I think flies under the radar somewhat. It has managed to adapt to the pandemic that we face, and although it's not as good as meeting together, children are still writing stories, still being coached and tutored, and still being published. And that's really a compliment to the people who run the Simpson Street Free Press. So here's a video, 3 minutes, 14 seconds long. I think you'll enjoy it. And as I did, you will probably learn quite a bit about Simpson Street Free Press in the process. Thank you again for your contributions, for your generosity. And once more, I urge the rest of you to line up and join the donors I hope we have an increase that's even more dramatic next week. Thank you all.
Simpson Street Free Press started in 1992 because parents in South Madison wanted after-school and summer programs that focused on academic support.
We are a nonprofit that allows young people to hone their reading and writing skills through a journalism program. So they actually write for Simpson Street Free Press and they produce their own newspaper.
If you have not read some of their work, you would not know that they are kids.
One of the problems that we have as a community is that we don't have enough structured programming for young people. And having organized, structured, and fun and engaging programming that's meaningful is critical to the success of young people long term.
With an extended school day model, we're actually able to sit down with students and work on their writing for a while and see the progress that happens even with one article. We can work on that with them.
My youngest son went there. He's 21 now, thanks to Simpson Street Free Press. He's off into college now, and my grandkids are part of it still today. This program works.
My daughter was the youngest, started when she was 9. Structure over there was very supportive of her as a learner.
A lot of volunteers work here, people that are very educated. Everybody bring their own skills and pass to our kids, and that's great.
We have a partnership with the UW-Madison Physics Department. They come here and tutor our students on math and science.
Almost every student who joins Simpson Street Free Press and test scores go up almost immediately. In the coming years, our strategic plan will be focused on Madison's reading crisis. But this curriculum, these methods, this approach to extended day academics can be adopted at almost any site.
It's critical for young people to be able to see themselves beyond their circumstance and their situation, and this program helps them with that opportunity.
Those kids, I tell you, everything that Simpson Street Free Press has done for them, they are going to pay it forward. I think about them in the workforce someday. They really are our future leaders.
They're not ashamed to ask for help. And the prize they receive when they open up one of these right here, and it says Simpson Street Free Press, and then they open up to a different page, and then they see the article that they wrote. That's joy.
I love to see the smile on their face when they get their articles published and how happy and accomplished they feel. And that's really how I felt when I was a kid.
So Joyce Bromley chairs this year's Manfred Trozinski Humanitarian Service Award Committee, and she has a few announcements for us. Joyce?
Thank you, President George. Yes, I'm chair of the Manfred Swarzinski Humanitarian Service Award Committee, and on behalf of the committee, I'm pleased to announce that Dr. Floyd Rose is this year's recipient. Each year, this committee struggles with how to recognize only one person among the many who were nominated for their humanitarian work. This year, we decided to acknowledge these candidates. A list of their names and a summary of their achievement is in our club's blog post. You will find a link to it at the top of the homepage of the website. We're confident that you too will be impressed with their contributions and the tribute it pays to our club. I'd like to take this opportunity to announce that Dora Hosak won the drawing from among those who answered the newsletter quiz on Rabbi Swarzinski's life as documented by Dick Goldberg. We owe a special thanks to Denny Carey for his donation of this beautiful fused glass votive vase that he created. Congratulations to Dory, and thank you to everyone who participated in the quiz. Dr. Floyd Rose, this year's recipient, will be honored at our special recognition program on November 18th and will speak to us about the Project 3000, a community response to COVID-19. Thank you.
Our member recruitment subcommittee is chaired by Charles McLymans, and they are asking a number of members to share the story about why they joined Rotary. This month, they have asked Sarah Best to share why she joined Rotary. She was here last week to share her interview with past President Susan Schmitz, and she's returning today to tell us about her Rotary experience so far.
Hi, my name is Sarah Best, and I'm the owner of a digital marketing agency called Sarah Best Strategy. So why did I join Rotary? I was invited to my first Rotary meeting by Casey Olkers, who I met through the Madison Symphony. At some point, Casey and I sat down for a coffee, and I explained that I was new in town. I moved here from Chicago, where I lived for 12 years, and where I had a pretty robust professional network. So moving to a new town was kind of hard, and I asked her, where could I meet local leaders? And so she took me to my first Rotary meeting, and from there, I was hooked. The biggest reason I've stayed in Rotary is because of the friendships that I've made, often with people I've never had a chance to meet otherwise. And sometimes that happens at the meetings, but sometimes it actually happens in a fellowship group or when we're volunteering to plant trees or pack up textbooks for schools that are abroad. Sometimes it's through committee service, or maybe it's even just getting to know someone over a coffee or catch up over lunch sometime. The other thing that I love about Rotary is the access that we have to different types of experiences. When I was in high school in Pennsylvania, one of my friends had been on a Rotary exchange in Finland. So that's one of the earliest things I knew about Rotary, was its unique ties to international countries. So my goal is to someday go on a friendship exchange and also to go to a Rotary International Convention. But my favorite experience that I've had as a Rotarian has been mentoring a Rotary scholar. I met Hannah during her senior year of high school, and actually went to her high school graduation at Shabazz. She was pretty nervous when she was heading into her freshman year, and that's why it's been so satisfying to see her achieve her dream of getting into a competitive nursing program, despite having a lot of obstacles that she's had to overcome as a learner and as a person. So being able to have that meaningful impact through Rotary is so enriching to my life. I wouldn't trade that for anything. So that's why I'm a member of Rotary and why I'll stay a member of Rotary.
So it's election season in our club, and we elect new directors next Wednesday, November 11th. Now, we have 12 members who serve 2-year staggered terms on our club board of directors, with 6 members elected annually. The immediate past president also serves a 1-year term. So our current board members are, and as you can see on the screen, Joyce Bromley, Mark Clare, Sarah Detienne, Stephen Elke, Paul Hoffman, Teresa Holmes, Andrea Kaminsky, and she's in her role as immediate past president, Haley Salsa Miller, Mark Moody, Mary O'Brien, Lee Richardson, Lynn Sexton, and Cheryl Wicke. So let's give them a round of applause. So as I mentioned, our board has 2-year staggered terms. So Joyce, Sarah, Paul, Teresa, Andrea, Haley, and Lynn will be going off the board on June 30th. The following members have agreed to place their names in nomination. By the way, we asked our nominees for a family or fun photo to add to their slide when I announce them today, so you'll see several additions to make it fun. Deb Archer at her daughter's wedding. Brian Baskin with his daughter and son and Bucky Badger. Herman Bauman. Sandy Geller. Jenny Jeffries as a young girl. Anita Muhammad. Charles McLymans with the Bronze Fawn statue in Milwaukee. Valerie Renk. Jen Savino at a Mallards game. Scott Strong enjoying some cotton candy with his daughter. Martha Sullivan. Rob Vandenberg with his daughters. So next week, the membership will select 6 of these leaders to join the board for a 2-year term beginning next July 1st. Now, the 12 nominees represent the future leaders of our club, and any combination of these 6 will serve our club for the next 2 years. Now, because of the pandemic, our club board adopted an emergency resolution to allow for our election to be held electronically. So we'll be sending out an email to all members on November 11th, and the members will need to click on the link and complete the ballot by noon the next day. So again, there's a 24-hour period. We also have sent the ballot last week to a few members who do not have an email, so they too can vote, and their instructions were to send the ballot so it could get to the club by November 11th. So thanks again to the 12 nominees who have agreed to place their names in the nomination this year. So we have birthday to celebrate with a little bit of humor or wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. So we also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our Club Synergy Scholarship Fund. So November 2nd, Brian Anderson. Also November 2nd, Peter Cavey, who shares this message. A financial advisor is an expert. He will know tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday didn't happen today. November 2nd, Victor Rodriguez. November 5th, Jonathan Solari. Now, Jonathan, as you know, is with the Madison Ballet. So he has a joke for us. So how many dance teachers does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a good one there. And November 7th, Phil Blake. November 7th, Bobby Sladkey. So thanks to our celebrants for the contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. Please join me in wishing them a happy birthday. Nick Kern and his children, Nika, Braken, and Colvin, will now sing Happy Birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you.
So I want to go on to members in the news. We have Paul Hoffman was pictured and quoted in an article titled Business Horror Stories Offer Lessons in Business 1029. And Charles McLyman was also featured on Channel 15 News, an interview titled Pope Support of Same-Sex Civil Union Spreads to Madison Area. That was on WMTV on 1021. And we also have some congratulations to Michelle McGrath, who has been selected as the nominee for the district governor for the 2023 to 2024 year. Again, I highlight these 3 members that are making a contribution, not only in the leadership of the community, but obviously with Rotary on a statewide district level basis. So thank you very much for all that our fellow Rotarians do to make our world a better place. So on to the main program. So as we move through our program today, I want to mention that we have added a survey link to each Friday morning's email from the Rotary office so our members can give us feedback on our weekly speaker. It is also a way for you to suggest future speakers. So please look at the survey link in your Friday email, and we appreciate your response to the very brief survey. So it's a very, very short, won't take long, but we need your feedback in order to continue to improve. So today's speaker is Professor David Canon, who is Department Chair and a Professor of Political Science at UW-Madison. He earned his PhD degree from the University of Minnesota. So again, let's not hold that against him. And previously taught at Duke University. So I think that's the Tar Heel, is that correct? So that's 2 strikes. But there's no third one, so that's good here. So his teaching and research interests are in American political institutions, especially Congress and elections. So his more specific research interests include racial representation, partisan realignments, political careers, and election administration. So he is the author of Race, Redistricting, and Representation, and also Actors, Athletes, and Astronauts, Political Amateurs in the U.S. Congress. Professor Canon is currently serving as editor of the Election Law Journal. So we look forward to your timely presentation, Professor Canon, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. So have you had questions for Professor Canon? Use the chat feature on YouTube, and I'll be watching the chat, and we'll ask him questions at the end. So I'm sure everybody's dying to hear about the election, Professor Canon.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to be with you. So yeah, this is a pretty crazy election season for sure. And it's something that when we booked this talk, maybe 2 months ago or so, we had no idea whether we'd know who was president now or it'd take a week till we knew who was going to be president. But yeah, so we've got lots of things to talk about. Okay, so whoops, I guess we got advanced in the slides here. Got to go back up a little bit. Sorry about that. So, you're taking care of it? Okay, so go back to the beginning of the, all the way up. So I'll start the slide that'll come up in a minute here. That has the very first slide is this picture. Yeah, there we go. I'll go and advance it. This is a picture that was in the State Journal yesterday, I think it was. It's a mural actually down on Gorham Street. It's pretty funny. It's a spinner. You can spin the dial and give you the reason for why you should be voting. And so things like to cancel out the vote of my uncle, or that you're a swing state, so it kind of matters. And so there's a picture of this guy, taking a picture of the reason to vote. So that's one thing that I think voters in Madison certainly took to heart, and in Wisconsin we had huge voter turnout in the state, and nationally it looks like we might have the highest turnout, at least for sure, since 2008, and maybe even more than that. So what I want to talk about is basically what happened last night. We still don't know for sure how this is going to turn out, but we have a better idea now than we did 8 hours ago, certainly. And one thing that I just want to start with, a really important point, I think, and this is something that all of the major news networks are talking about, and you see it repeated ad nauseum online, and that is that this election's not over until every vote is counted. And everyone is saying that, but we need to repeat that, because President Trump last night and then this morning again was tweeting that basically he had won, and that any counting of votes after this point is fraudulent, and the election's being stolen. Here's a tweet, and then another Facebook post. And you note that both Facebook and Twitter have put their warning labels on it to say, look, this is not true. So be warned that this is something you shouldn't pay attention to. Here's the one where he's basically saying that it's a big win. And so this really flies in the face of the practices of many states in the country, that there are state laws that 22 states actually count votes after Election Day as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. Now here in Wisconsin, the ballot has to be received by Election Day in order to be counted. But there are 22 states where that's not true. And in most states, here's a slide, we can go full screen on this one. Yeah, it shows in 2016 the percentage of votes that were counted by after Wednesday morning. And you can see that for all except for a handful of states, there's Kentucky, Louisiana, let's see, just a couple, maybe South Carolina, there are a handful that were done by Wednesday morning. But every other state had between 5 and 10% of the vote. In some cases, like Washington, that does all of their voting by mail and has for 20 years. Utah, California, they had 40% of their votes still that weren't counted in 2016. And that's kind of standard practice in American politics, is that different states have different laws in terms of how they count the votes. And so we always have been counting votes for many days after the election. Now, usually when the election isn't very close, it doesn't really matter. So we knew that President Trump was the winner in 2016, early Wednesday morning. And so when all those votes kept on rolling in California, it didn't affect the result of the election. Well, now that Pennsylvania and Michigan are two of the key states that are still counting ballots, that late counting actually matters a lot more. So that's, again, something we have to keep in mind, is that the election's not over until we count all the votes. Now, here is how the Electoral College map would look, or how it does look, if the election were to end like right now. Like if we stop counting votes like right now, and if it goes in the direction it looks like it's headed, Joe Biden would win by 2 electoral votes. It'd be 270 to 268. And the crazy thing about this is, has Joe Biden not won that Omaha district in Nebraska? You know, Nebraska is one of the 2 states, along with Maine, that splits their electoral votes by congressional district, and the statewide winner gets the bonus of 2. Well, Joe Biden did win that Nebraska 2nd district that's surrounded around Omaha. And that's the margin of difference, you know, between a tie, in which case Trump would have been elected by the House of Representatives, and he would have been elected president based on that vote in the House. But because of that 1 electoral vote in Nebraska, you know, if again things stand up the way they do now, this is what's likely to happen. Now there are other states still in play as well. Michigan hasn't been called. Wisconsin hasn't been called. Nevada hasn't been called. Those are all looking like Joe Biden's going to win them. But again, we don't know until all the votes have been counted for sure. And then Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Georgia are the 3 states that Trump is leading in right now, but haven't been called. Of those 3, it looks like Trump will probably win Georgia and North Carolina. But Georgia still has a lot of votes that haven't come in from Atlanta and some of the other heavily Democratic counties. And so it's possible that Joe Biden could catch him in Georgia. And it's also quite possible that Pennsylvania will go that way, because Pennsylvania is going to be the last of these states to be counted. We won't know Pennsylvania probably till Thursday or Friday. Friday probably is a good bet, because they still have well over 1 million votes to count in Pennsylvania, and it's a very lengthy, time-consuming process to count their ballots. And so that's the way things look right now. And again, we'll just have to wait and see how those 6 remaining critical states play out. Now, one thing that has been getting a lot of attention was the number of mailed ballots this year. I'll show the map of the country here. That was as of yesterday morning, we had more than 100 million Americans, about 101 million Americans voted before Election Day in this election. That's 73% of the vote total from 2016. The purple states there are ones where the early vote turnout exceeded the 2016 vote, and then the darker the green, the heavier the use of the early voting. You know, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, they were all over 90-95%. So early voting really was the story of this election. And here's the trend line going back to 1990, showing the increase in early voting we've seen on a kind of a steady basis, where if you look back in the late 90s up to the year 2000, about 90% of people were still casting their votes on Election Day in person. And that you can see that starts to go down then after the year 2000, to where in 2018, about 40%, both in 2016 presidential election, the 2018 midterms, about 40% of Americans were voting early, about 60% were voting in person still. And the green line then are people who are voting by mail. The orange line is voting early in person, and those are both, had been both around 20% or so. And in this election, again, we're going to hit probably at least 2/3 of the electorate. We're between 60 to 65% of the electorate will have voted before Election Day. Once we see the final turnout numbers, we'll know that for sure. And so this really was something that has put additional pressure on the clerks who are counting the votes, because rather than counting a relatively small percentage, 20% of the votes by mail, now some of these states are having 40, 50, 60% of their votes coming in by mail, and they just weren't able to handle the volume. So I really think it's pretty remarkable the extent to which the clerks were able to stay on top of this and count the votes in a relatively timely way compared to what could have happened. I mean, a lot of people were talking about a potential election meltdown, and there were definitely some glitches around the country in various places. But given the pressures of the COVID pandemic and then all the pressures of counting all those early votes, the Election Day went, I think, much more smoothly overall than people had feared could happen. So that, I think, is a really good thing about what happened yesterday for sure. Okay, and then so here's the early voting map. Now here's the Senate map as it stands today, and here is both in the Senate races and in the presidential race. Definitely should note that the Republicans exceeded the polling expectations pretty substantially. That on the presidential side, Joe Biden was ahead in most of the poll aggregators, 7 to 8%. It looks like his marginal victory will be more like maybe 4% or so nationally, and so that's a little outside the margin of error. And then again in this election, as with 2016, a lot of the state polls were off as well. Where it looks like Wisconsin will go to Biden, but the polls were showing Biden with a 7-point lead, and it ended up being about a 1% lead at best, or a little under 1%. And so that again, it appears that the polls were off. And the same is true then of the Senate races, because in the Senate races, most forecasters were predicting the Democrats would pick up either 3 or 4 seats. Some people were even saying 5. And so that would have put the Democrats at 50 or 51. And then, so this is how things look now. Now, some of these states have been called since this map was downloaded, and so Arizona now has been called for the Democrats. Illinois has been called for the Democrats. And then Tennessee and West Virginia. So this was actually kind of early map, are both Republican. So the states that are still kind of up for grabs, and so the Senate has not been decided. Michigan is the one Democratic seat that really will depend on how those absentee ballots are counted. Again, Joe Biden has taken the lead in Michigan and is slowly building that lead, it looks like, as those last few percent of the votes come in. And so that might be enough to put the Democrat there, Peters, over the top, but that's a very close race there. And if Democrats don't hold Michigan, they have very little chance, I think, of regaining the Senate, because that would be another loss for the Democrats. The states that they have flipped so far have been Colorado and Arizona, and then the Republicans picked up Alabama when Doug Jones lost the seat that he had won in the special election 2 years ago. And so the states that are still in play then are Georgia with their 2 races. So they have both the regular election and then the special election. And in Georgia, they have a runoff rule. And so if neither candidate gets 50% of the vote after all the votes are tallied, they have a runoff on January 5th. And so already one of the special election race is already gone into, it is going to be the runoff. And the other one with Perdue and Ossoff, that one's actually very close. Perdue is leading right now, but he's very close to 50%. And so if some of those late ballots again come in from Atlanta and some of the other urban areas, that might be enough to push Ossoff up to pull Perdue down below 50%, which that election also would go into a runoff election. And then you have North Carolina, where it looks like the Republican's going to win there. And then in Maine, with Susan Collins' seat, another very interesting situation, because in Maine, they have ranked choice voting. And so with ranked choice voting, you actually rank your candidates first, second, third, or however many candidates there are. And if nobody has 50% of the vote, you bump off the bottom person on the list and reallocate their votes for their number 2, and then see if anyone gets over 50. If still no one's over 50, then you bump off the next person, reallocate those votes, and then eventually you'll have a head-to-head, and someone will get 50% of the vote. And so in that race, Susan Collins is below 50% now. So the ranked choice voting, if that holds up, will kick in. And it's possible that Gideon, the Democrat, could catch her by garnering more of the second place votes of the people who finished 3rd and 4th. And so again, we'll have to see if that plays out that way or not. So it's conceivable then that if the Democrats pick, so if Joe Biden wins, you only need 50 seats in the Senate because Harris would break the tie as vice president, and so then they would need to pick up 2 of those 3, like one of the Georgia seats and Maine, in order to get up to 50. And so that's a possibility. And the interesting thing here would be that special election in Georgia. that could determine the balance of the Senate in January. Can you imagine the amount of money and the national attention that will be poured into Georgia for that election? And so that's where things stand today. I think I'll go ahead and stop and open up for questions. I know there are going to be a lot of questions. There are a lot of other topics we could get into, but I think it'd be good just to see more what you want to talk about, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Okay, great. So the first question is from Ron Luskin, who asked about polling. So this is the second time that the pollsters have missed the mark. So if is the methodology flawed and broken, and how can pollsters regain credibility?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ron. Yeah, it's clearly the polls are off again this time around, and it looks like they're off in a similar way to how they were off in 2016. So the national number, again, will probably be on the outer bounds of what the margin of error would be, as it was in 2016 when Clinton won the popular vote by about 2%. The polling averages were about 4.5%. And so that was kind of within the margin of error in the popular vote. What was off in 2016, it appears to be off again this time around, are more the state polls. And we have the state polls in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Minnesota. They're all showing pretty substantial leads for Joe Biden, and in each case, it ended up being razor thin margins, and so clearly the polls are off to some extent there, and so I think what the pollsters are going to have to try to do is to figure out, is this a response problem, where like people talked about the shy Trump voters, that there were some Trump voters out there that just wouldn't respond to pollsters, and if that's the case, that's really a hard thing to try to ferret out. And it's difficult to be able to, you can't force someone to answer a poll. And so like one thing they did to correct for 2016 was they realized a lot of the polls were underweighting whites without a college degree. And so they were underweighted in the poll, and they broke heavily for Donald Trump, because in the past, college education wasn't that strong a predictor of how people were going to vote. In 2016, it ended up being a huge predictor. And so if you didn't wait for college education, you would understate the Trump support in the poll. And so there may be some things like that we can ferret out and look at in looking at these polls to try to figure out what went wrong. One thing it looks like from what we've seen so far from exit polling, that polls had underestimated the Latino support for Donald Trump. It looks like, especially in Florida, in the Miami area, President Trump did a lot better with Latino voters. We'll have to see if that is a substantial and significant problem, and see if there are any other things that the pollsters can kind of correct. Now, one thing though to note, that this is it may just be a Trump effect. It is possible that the problem with pollsters they're having right now is the difficulty of finding the Trump voters and getting an accurate read on them. Because remember, in 2018, the pollsters were like right on the money. Like they nailed that election. They predicted exactly what the seat gain would be for Democrats in the House. They predicted the Republicans picking up a seat in the Senate. So they were like right on the money in 2018. And so it could be that maybe this is just the difficulty in trying to figure out who the Trump supporters will be. And if so, maybe it's not as much of a structural fix that's needed.
Great, thank you. Next question from Charles McLymans is, why aren't there more uniform federal guidelines on how ballots are received and counted?
Yes, I embrace that question, and I wish I could wave my magic wand as elections are and make that happen, because it's so true. And any like foreign observers who come in and observe our elections, and I do a lot of media interviews with foreign journalists all the time around election time, and that's one question they always ask, like, why do you have 50 different sets of laws on how you do your elections? Why don't you have a national election commission the way every other country does? Well, the answer is, of course, our Constitution sets up a federal system of government, and in our federal system of government, states control elections, and it says right there in the Constitution that the state legislatures get to determine the manner in which the electoral votes are determined. And so, and also get to determine the time, manner, place of elections. And so unless we amend the Constitution, we really can't do anything about that. That's the way that our system is structured. And so there are some disadvantages, and we're seeing them, I think, in an election like this, where you do have these great variations in how votes are counted, how long you have to count the votes, what kind of things are needed to to check the validity of the mail-in ballots. Do you need a witness? Do you need a signature? That all varies from state to state as well. And so I completely agree that our elections would work much more smoothly, much more efficiently if we could have one uniform set of practices. But again, unfortunately, it would take amending the Constitution to make that happen.
Thank you. Next question is from Paul Karch, who says, the Trump campaign says it will ask for a recount in Wisconsin. Can you please remind us how recent Wisconsin recounts have come out?
Yeah, so the recounts have never changed the outcome of election in Wisconsin. We've had a couple recounts. They did them back in 2016, where I think the Jill Stein campaign actually called for a recount. And recounts never shift 20,000 plus votes. I mean, it just you'll shift a few votes on the margins. If that margin stands up, it's a little under 21,000 right now for Biden. Last time I checked, right before I came in, you're not going to change that many votes in a recount.
Great. Ron Luskin says, tell more about the polling operations led by your colleague, Professor Barry Burton. How did it go for the polls for his polls in various states?
Yeah, so Barry Burton is the head of our election research center here at UW, and Barry did a series of polls in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. They called the Battleground poll. And they actually were closer than some of the pollsters. They did show leads for Biden in all three states. And in Wisconsin, I think the last poll they had in Wisconsin had Biden up, I think it was maybe six or seven among likely voters. And so that was a miss towards the high end. But you may remember that the day after that Election Research Center poll came out, there was an ABC Washington Post poll out that had a 17-point lead for Biden. Like, everyone knew that one was off. Like, that was crazy. Like, just like no way was that anything close to what was really going on. But so that I think it shows a lot of the other polls were even off by a bigger margin. And so their polls were to the plus side, certainly for Biden, but it looks like, again, Biden's going to win two of those three states and maybe all three, and so they had the direction right, but just the margin bigger than they had forecast.
Next question, but from Michael May. He says, in discussing the Electoral College, do you think the interstate compact approach to reform can be successful, and will the courts accept it?
Yeah, good. Thanks for asking about that, Mike. Yeah, so can we bring up the slides again? Because I actually have a slide on that at the end. Keep on, or I can forward through. But I've got a slide showing the compact and the states. So here are the states that have adopted the compact and so what I should back up a step, explain for those who aren't familiar with the concept. So the compact between the states is a way of avoiding amending the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. And so, especially since the 2000 election and now after 2016, when you had the popular vote winner of the election lose the Electoral College, you have more people calling for getting rid of the popular vote, getting rid of the Electoral College and having popular vote for the president. And so what the compact between the states does is that it takes advantage of that constitutional clause that says that state legislatures get to decide how their electoral votes are allocated. And so these state legislatures took that to heart, and they passed state laws saying that they pledged to cast their electoral votes for the national popular vote winner, not the popular vote winner of their state. The compact then only kicks in when enough states sign up for it that have 270 electoral votes, so a majority of the Electoral College. And so I think I've got I thought I had but yeah, that's all right. I had another slide, I thought, on the compact. But basically, the idea is that by passing these state laws, you don't need to amend the Constitution because it's just done through a state law and is consistent with the clause that says the state legislatures get to decide that. Whether or not this would be upheld by the Supreme Court, I also should mention that enough states have passed it now to get us to 196 electoral votes, so we're 74 short of getting to that 270 that would be needed to have the compact kick in. And so this is, I think, a clever way of trying to have a backdoor solution that will allow popular vote winner to win the presidency without amending the Constitution. Now, there is a debate among constitutional scholars as to whether or not this would be constitutional, and obviously it would come down to what the Supreme Court says, and it's kind of hard to predict, I think. I think if you take a strict constructionist approach, so like Alito and Gorsuch and Thomas especially, adhere to that perspective in interpreting the Constitution, it seems like you would need to say, yeah, this is okay, because the Constitution, clearly says that state legislatures, get to decide how their electoral votes to be allocated. So like early in our nation's history, back in the early 1800s, some states didn't even have popular vote for their electors at all. Like the people didn't decide that. The state legislatures just picked the electors directly. And so, if that was okay, then maybe this would be okay as well. But it's not clear. It could easily go the other way. If this did end up going into effect, the Supreme Court might end up striking it down. It's just, we'd have to see what the court at that time would rule. But it is an interesting constitutional question, certainly.
So I'm going to combine your answer here on the interstate compact approach with another question that said, is there a serious effort to change from the electoral college model? So would you consider that the most serious effort, or you think that there's another one, or it should be a better way to change the approach?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I think that the compact is the most serious approach to changing the electoral college because every other approach would require a constitutional amendment. And the smaller states benefit from having the electoral college because they get a disproportionate say in who the president would be because of the 2 elector bonus that the small states get. The smallest states get 1 electoral vote for every about 200,000 people, whereas the biggest states get 1 electoral vote for every about 750, 800,000 people. So there's about a 3.5, 4-to-1 difference between the amount of power of voting for president and electoral college the biggest states have to the smaller states. So the smaller states wouldn't want to give up that power voluntarily. Like, why would they want to give up that big advantage? So I think any effort to get rid of the electoral college through a constitutional amendment is doomed to fail. I just don't think that's going to happen. This compact is possible. Like, they're already at 196. Now, the problem I think here for the compact is that at this point in history, the appearance is of helping the Democrats by doing this, because right now it's been Democrats who have been affected by winning the popular vote and losing the electoral college. So as long as the perceived advantage of getting rid of the electoral college would be seen as benefiting the Democratic Party, I think this also is fairly unlikely to happen given our polarized times that we have right now. And the Democrats simply don't have enough unified control of government at the state level to be able to get those additional 74 votes right now. And so I do think the compact between the states is the most serious effort out there right now to get rid of the Electoral College, but it too faces some pretty serious political obstacles, as would amending the Constitution.
Okay. Next question is, what is the impact of voters between ages 18 to 22 years old?
Yeah, so the millennials and the Generation Z voters have emerged as a more powerful block of voters than they have been in the past. That as recently as 1994, there was no difference in the partisan pattern of voting between 18 and 29-year-olds and those 65 and over. They had exactly the same percentage voting Democratic and Republican. There was no age gap. So you've heard about the gender gap. Well, there is an age gap now, a big age gap. And it first appeared in a significant way in 2008 when Barack Obama was first elected president. Obama really appealed to young voters. And you saw that age gap open up where the 18 to, increase it, I think you said 18 to 22, but I'll increase that to 29 because that's where most of the exit polling is done on that age cohort. And that group had about, I think it's about a plus 20 or so for Barack Obama over John McCain in 2008. And then in 2016, we saw an even bigger age gap. It was around 35 points in 2016. And we saw also a similarly big gap in 2018 in the midterm elections. And while we don't have the final turnout numbers yet from yesterday, and we won't have those for quite some time, it does appear that the youth vote was up pretty substantially yesterday. We don't know how much yet. We do know that it was way higher than it ever had been in the 2018 midterm elections, because there is a fairly straight linear relationship between age and voting. The older you are, the more you vote, till you hit about age 80, then it goes down a bit at that point. But it's just like a straight linear relationship. That curve has started to flatten a little bit. And so young people are starting to vote at a higher rate than they had in the past. And when turnout goes up, like 2018, we had the highest midterm turnout of any election that we'd had in 100 years. You had to go back to 1918 to have a midterm election that had a similar kind of turnout. And so youth turnout in that election was up as well, and it was up at a higher rate than the turnout for other age groups. And so yes, the youth vote is getting to be more significant, both because of this age gap, where there's more of a difference now in terms of partisan patterns of voting based on age, and because they actually are voting more now than they had in the past.
Thank you. Next question is from Paul Karch, who asks, any analysis on the role of social media in this election? Is it more or less than 2016?
Yeah, it'll be a while before we have the evidence on the role of social media. That's something that it takes quite a while to sift through all of the evidence. People have been collecting that data now. Those studies first started appearing in 2016 when it became increasingly evident that social media, was becoming increasingly important as a way of reaching voters. We also know, unfortunately, that social media is the main vehicle for misinformation in elections. It's where all of the bots from Russia and the other foreign interference in elections we saw in 2016 and 2018, and to some extent in this election as well, were feeding misinformation into the election, posing to be legitimate news sources when they really weren't, and appearing on Facebook, and then often getting reposted and sent on to people thinking it was real news. And so social media can play, I think, a very positive role in politics by getting people more engaged, more involved, more organized, but it also has a potential downside of, because it is such an open forum where anything goes. Facebook, Twitter, they both have tried their best to clamp down on that misinformation in this election, but it really is a tough task to try to do that, because once the misinformation gets out there, it's kind of like, the genie's out of the bottle.
Thank you. Next question from Stanley Inhorns, who says, why is almost every county in the U.S. red, except for those counties in metropolitan areas? Why are these rural areas so uniformly Republican?
Yeah, well, if you look at the map of the country, of just the red and blue America, it always looks so red. And that's one reason, because the rural counties are they're big and they're not heavily populated, and the cities are small and they're heavily populated. And so I've seen the red and blue map. Sometimes it's corrected for population size, and they kind of blow up Chicago and New York, and they get to be really big, and then those little tiny counties in Montana and Texas kind of shrink down. So it's a better visual representation of the actual population distribution. But the reality is still there, that the question asked, which is, rural America is very Republican, urban America is very Democratic. And one thing, and this again is going to take deeper analysis to get at this, but one thing that appears happened in this election is that divide got even deeper. It happened here in Wisconsin for sure. One thing I looked at pretty systematically just this morning was to look at our 72 counties and to see, did they stay the way they were in 2016, or did they change? Because, like, for example, in 2016, we had 22 counties that flipped Obama to Trump. They had voted for Obama 2012, they voted for Trump in 2016, 22 counties. We had two that flipped yesterday, Sauk County and Door County. There are only two counties in the state that actually flipped and went from Trump to Biden. We had 33 counties that were Trump counties that got even more supportive of Trump, and we had 11 counties that were Clinton counties that got even more supportive of Biden. So it looks like this the pattern of that urban-rural divide became even more pronounced in this election because the rural counties became even more Republican, the urban counties became even more Democratic. And whether or not that holds up nationally, again, I looked at Michigan, had the same pattern as well. I didn't have time to look at it more systematically, but my guess is that's probably what we're going to see around the country. The only exception to that are suburban areas. Suburban areas used to be heavily Republican, and they are trending more Democratic now. So they're moving a little bit, in the other direction. But otherwise, it seems like that gap is getting bigger. And the reason why it seems to me is really something that my colleague Kathy Kramer has written so eloquently about in her book on Wisconsin politics called The Politics of Resentment. And what Professor Kramer found in traveling around the state, talking to people in coffee shops in small towns in rural Wisconsin and other places where people would meet just to talk politics and talk Packers football and whatever else, she found that there was this real resentment of urban areas in the rural parts of the state, and that they felt like Madison and Milwaukee got all the benefits, and the people in the rural areas got the short end of the stick always and didn't get any respect. And that's a very real perception in the rural areas. And I think it explained, and Trump tapped into that resentment then when he campaigned in 2016 and again this time around. I think being that outsider and saying that I believe in the same things you believe in. I want to make America great again. Kind of the patriotic statement of supporting the country. That's something that plays well in rural areas, and so I think that helps explain Trump's success there. Now, the other thing people have pointed to as well, and there's some evidence for, is the focus on immigration in 2016, keeping people out of the country. That message also resonated in a lot of rural areas in the country as well, so that could play into it too.
Next to last question here is, what are your thoughts on ranking voting?
Oh, so like in Maine, the ranked choice voting, I love it. I think it's a really, really good way to allow people to vote their true preferences. Because one thing you often hear from people, in fact, I hear this from my students sometimes, where they say, I hate having to vote for the lesser of two evils. Like I really, like the Libertarian Party, or I really like the Green Party. I wish I could vote for them, but I feel like I'm throwing my vote away if I do that. Well, with ranked choice voting, you can do that. You can vote for your number one person, a Libertarian, and you can put Donald Trump number two. Or you can vote for the Green Party number one and put Joe Biden number two, and you're not throwing away your vote, because with ranked choice voting then, you just end up throwing off your candidate if they don't do well. But it allows for a truer expression of voter preferences, and it's been used in a lot of local elections around the country for decades. And it's a little confusing to voters for the first time they are using it. It takes some voter education to get them to understand how to do this. But it's worked pretty well in Maine, and we'll see now if it catches on. I think it's on the ballot in a couple other states yesterday, and so we'll see if it's an idea that spreads, because I think it is a good way of letting voters really express their views.
Okay. Final question is, obviously, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of sources. What do you recommend that we as Rotarians look at? Is it the New York Times website? What website do you refer us to that we can get the most accurate information as to what's going on?
So do you mean, if he means this in general or just with the election?
In general, with the election, we're still, a lot of information is still out there. We don't know. How do we get the latest? Because there's so much disinformation out there. So
let me answer that question on two levels. One, just kind of narrowly about election returns. And there, for me, there's a clear winner. It's the New York Times website, because they finally did this morning what I was doing all last night for like several hours. I had a couple of computers open, one that had the 2016 results, one with the 2020 results, and I was comparing counties. Because that's what you need to do to see what the shifts are. Once the votes are in, how does Door County compare to what it was in 2016? You can see those shifts. And no one was doing that. Like, no one had that up there. And finally, New York Times this morning, they had for their battleground states really nicely organized. And one column was 2016 vote by county. The other column was 2020 vote by county. And you could actually see what those shifts were. And so I think the New York Times was the best presentation of the election results. But in general, then, for information, I would encourage people to consult a variety of websites, because I think one problem with American politics today is we all get buried in our own ideological silos, and we tend to only read information that we agree with. And I think that helps contribute to our polarized politics. So I strongly urge my students to do this. I do it myself. I urge all of you to do it. Kind of force yourself to broaden out. Read some things. If you normally read the New York Times, go read Fox News and Wall Street Journal and other things on the other side. And so do try to read a range of sources. And there's some media aggregators, like Real Clear Politics is a good website that does this, that they have their top stories of the day, that they'll have things from the National Review and from the New Republic and a whole range of opinion magazines. And so they kind of do the work for you of finding a range of ideological perspectives. So that's one of many that you can use to try to get that broader range of views. So,
Professor Canon, outstanding presentation, obviously very timely. You're very sharp considering you didn't sleep at all last night from the sounds of it. So let's give Professor Canon an outstanding round of applause, please. Thank you. So again, outstanding job from the program committee of getting Professor Canon to share with us. We all had a lot of questions, and now we have a little bit more understanding of what's happening in our society. And of course, this is part of growing. If you remember our value proposition, connect, grow, and serve. And this is an example of how we grow as leaders and Rotarians. So thank you very much for the program committee. And with that, thank you everyone for attending today's meeting, and we are adjourned.